Leveling up is such a common experience in video games that it's practically synonymous with the hobby. If Hollywood wants to show you someone is a quote-unquote gamer or a nerd, you just have that character yell out, "Level up," literal shorthand for gaming as a hobby. So many first-person shooters have this system too, a blended hybrid approach to gaming. Add in a little of this, a pinch of that, and you get a better game out than what you went in with. In fact, it's so pervasive that finding a shooter without RPG elements in it is harder than you might think. Earlier this week on my Discord, a viewer asked the question, what is the first FPS to have a leveling system? My gut reaction was to say Deus Ex, but then I started to think about it, and I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I've done some research, and I think I have 3 answers. It's all about the definition. Deus Ex gets a lot of credit because it really tied everything together. It was kind of the poster boy for successful immersive simulation games. If you've never heard the term immersive sims, perhaps you've played one of the games. Deus Ex, obviously, BioShock, Dishonored, Prey 2017, Thief the Dark Project. These are the staples of the immersive sim genre. The idea of an immersive sim is that you can do things in a lot of ways. You can break down the door, or sneak through the air ducts, or distract the guard, or kill everyone. Mark Brown, another YouTuber who runs the Game Maker's Toolkit, additionally adds in one other requirement, in that immersive sims don't use scripted events. They use rules that the world is governed by. It's easy, therefore, to see why someone might immediately look at the big boy in the room and go, well, yeah, of course that's the answer. That's the one. It had levels, it had multiple dialogue options, you could level up each weapon type, you could really role play. And I think that's kind of the definition we're looking for. FPSRPG, first-person shooter role-playing game, a hybrid of both. So what's the definition? How much RPG do you need in your FPS before it's no longer an FPS? And at what point does your FPSRPG just become an RPG with FPS elements? What is the balance? For the purposes of my research and to come up with an answer, I have to at least have a guideline, and I'm not going to pretend that it was super scientific. Essentially, my definition is that the game is primarily a shooter, that the core gameplay is shooting things. Secondly, that it actually adds in RPG elements, specifically character progression, not just the ability to explore the world or listen to NPCs, but your character actually grows or improves in some way. This is really my bare bones minimum requirements. I understand that some purists will take umbrage with the fact that I don't specify more stringent requirements. But the fact is that I can change the definition in any way to be more exclusive. I can change the definition to remove potential answers to the question, but I'd rather be a little bit more open and get something that maybe is a bit surprising. So with that definition in mind, does Deus Ex hold the title? No, of course not. This would be a really short video if it did. You could have clicked off in the first 30 seconds. No. And I imagine several of you who know the history of Deus Ex will immediately go to System Shock 2. Deus Ex was released in 2000, but System Shock 2 was released in 1999, and it is a very, very similar in style. So therefore, it clearly must be the winner, and System Shock 2 is a great game, one of the best ever, really. Even today, the game is incredibly good. It has leveling and multiple ways to play, there's classes even. It's a role-playing game, absolutely deserving of the FPS RPG terminology. However, a few years before System Shock 2 was a game called Azrael's Tier. This was a first-person game with a lot of RPG elements, but it was more of an adventure game. Of course, at this period of time and before it, the term FPS RPG or hybrid shooter or immersive sim, these weren't terms that you could use. They didn't exist yet. So the fact that this was called a first-person adventure doesn't immediately preclude it from being in the running. And for a lot of retro gamers, this is something they may have thought immediately of when I mentioned early FPSRPG. But you'll recall I mentioned System Shock 2, and you might think about how that game has a 2 in it, and therefore there was a System Shock 1. And as you might imagine, it was very similar to System Shock 2. The original System Shock was released in 1994, and it could very well be a contender here as well, but no. Shadowcaster, released in 1993. It's a fantasy, it's a shooter, it's got inventory management, it's got NPCs and stories, but no. Probably the first game that we come to where we can say this is a real, actual contender for first FPS RPG is 1993 and the release of a game called Pathways into Darkness. This was a game released by Bungie, the makers of Halo and Oni, and it is so incredibly reminiscent of Doom and other similar games from the time period. It is unequivocally a shooter. It has an inventory, it has in-game events. In fact, here's how this game works, because I think some of you will be pretty impressed and maybe even find some parallels from modern games. See, Pathways into Darkness was created by 3 guys in a dorm in Chicago and was the success that allowed the founders of Bungie to, well, found Bungie. You play a soldier sent on the orders of your leader, the President of the United States, to the Yucatan Peninsula. The President has been warned by aliens that at this exact location, an ancient sleeping god would awaken and destroy the world. Your job is to deliver a nuclear weapon to the bottom of the pyramid that the god lives in and blow it up, burying the god under tons of rock. However, as you parachute in, your parachute fails to open. You plummet to your presumed death, only to awaken later with all your equipment broken. You head into the pyramid to meet up with your team, only to find them all dead, along with the bodies of treasure hunters and even occult-seeking Nazis. And here's some of the coolest features from this game. You can find a crystal that allows you to speak to the dead bodies you find and get story and plot. Find out things about the game world by interrogating the dead. Also, there's a timer, and if you fail to set off the nuclear bomb before the ancient god awakens, the world ends and you die. There's multiple endings, and you can totally fail. Maybe you don't set off the bomb before the god awakens. Maybe you don't escape before the bomb goes off. Maybe you don't get extracted and have to escape on foot before the bomb explodes. It's very cool. Some of you, though, you're not going to be happy with Pathways. You don't like that option because in 1992, a full year before Pathways, Ultima Underworld released. And you know this is a really, really influential game. It's very unique and very cool, and it's not a shooter. This is a first-person RPG for sure, 100%. It's the first free movement first-person game, and it has no shooting. It is disqualified. However, Pathways is still beaten out by an earlier game. This time, we're talking about 1990's Corporation. This is a really compelling option for first FPS RPG because, well, it came out so early. And it's got a lot of the stuff we're looking for. It's an FPS, a little janky, but it's there. It's got hacking, multiple classes, stealth, item management. You can upgrade your character with modifications. It's super compelling for the title of first FPS RPG, but it's not. Neither is it Eye of the Beholder. This barely, and I mean barely, qualifies as a shooter, though it definitely qualifies as an RPG. It's a few months earlier than Corporation, and it kind of depends on if you think a wizard's lightning bolts qualify a game as a shooter. Finally, it's also not 1979's Akalabeth. It came out super early, it's first person, sure, it's from Richard Garriott, the creator of Ultima, and it's got combat, but it's not a shooter, it's barely an RPG. There's no real story, there's not much here. So if it's none of these, then what is it? The first option is 1996's Strife. This is a shooter, and it's an RPG. Unlike Pathways to Darkness, which released in 1993, Strife has a lot more RPG to it. You've got an inventory, you've got friendly characters, and neutral characters. You can talk to people and make choices. There's branching quest lines, and by completing those quests, you can advance the plot. There's stealth, so if you kill someone in the open, an alarm will sound, but if you assassinate them quietly, you'll get away with it. There's no levels, it uses a hub world design, and you upgrade your character as you advance through the story. You level up. It's also way more of a shooter than System Shock, which you'll remember came out in 1994, but that game is barely a shooter. It technically is, but Strife definitely is. You can't possibly look at Strife and not see an FPS. So why this one? Why not Corporation or Shadowcaster? Why not Pathways to Darkness? All of the other earlier games have some concession you have to make. Oh, it's the first, except you don't really level up. Oh, it's the first, except it's more of a turn-based shooter. Oh, it's the first, except you're using melee weapons. Not with Strife. Strife is a shooter, and it's an RPG. It's not a super RPG, it's kind of basic, but it fulfills all the requirements, and it does it really well. This is probably the first game on the list where you can't find some major reason to disqualify it. Strife is Doom RPG, and that's about as perfect as you can get. Although, in 1988, Arsis Software, the future creators of Gran Turismo, Air Combat, and more, would release a game called Star Cruiser. This game was only released in Japan for the PC-98 and X68000. It was ported to the Messiah and the Mega Drive, the Sega Genesis. This game in 1988 has full 3D rendered backgrounds, objects, opponents, no sprites here. It has a story, and a pretty in-depth one from what I can see, though I don't read Japanese, so I guess it could be kind of uninspired. There's a lot of dialogue here, there's a lot of characters. The entire game is first person, and as you move as a player through towns, into buildings, and into your spaceship, which you then use to engage in warfare. You upgrade your ship, you customize your weapons. There's a lot of screens that will remind you of JRPGs. It's often literally described as a role-playing first-person shooter, so there's that too. This is the first FPS RPG. It was released at least 2 years before the closest competitor, and it's clearly a shooter and clearly an RPG. It fits. So why even mention Strife? Well, Star Cruiser was only played in Japan, and while it won Game of the Year, Best Adventure Game, Best Action Game, Best Special Effects, it's a game that is immediately going to draw ire because it's not a pistol. It's a gun on a ship. Are mech games first-person shooters? Is Wing Commander a first-person shooter? Is Elite Dangerous a first-person shooter? And there's the fact that it never left Japan, so its reach is smaller. I think this is the first FPS RPG. I think it absolutely earns that, but I understand that some people won't like that idea. They'll prefer Strife, because Strife is an FPS, it is an RPG, it meets those requirements really well, and there's no questioning its legacy. Its blood is pure. But I did say 3 games, didn't I? And I said that it's dependent on the definition. So for those of you who disagree and think Star Cruiser couldn't possibly be the first FPS RPG, my third choice is actually for you. This is the only uncontestable FPS RPG. It lays claim to the title without argument. That game? Deus Ex. Oh, but what about all these others that we've talked about? Well, Deus Ex is the only game that called itself an FPS RPG. Strife didn't do that, neither did Star Cruiser. So the first FPS RPG? Well, the one that coined the term, the one that made it to the mainstream and changed perceptions and made FPS RPG a thing that could exist. Deus Ex It's clearly the right answer. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think? Strife? Star Cruiser? Deus Ex? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to know your reasoning. Please consider sharing this video. It's the only way anyone sees us, and I'd really appreciate it. If you share it, let me know, and I'll totally give you a digital high five. You can watch another video in the corner right now, and as always, we'll see you on the next one.